all of our politicians are bought. It's a machine. It's a system. You've explained it eloquently here. How do we fix it, if we can?
Oh, we can. And in fact, if you look over American history, there have been waves of progress and then regression. So the current situation, for example, is somewhat similar to the 1920s. In the 1920s, the inequality, which is colossal, is about what it was in the 1920s. The labor movement had pretty much been destroyed. Independent thought had been severely repressed by Woodrow Wilson's Red Scare and other devices. And there were celebrations in the 1920s about a utopia of the masters, the end of history. Well, the 1930s, that radically changed. There were popular movements. They democratized the country. They created very significant, the government was compelled to create significant welfare measures, Social Security, labor rights, and so on, which greatly improved the country. I mean, they weren't perfect, but they were a significant improvement. In fact, the regulation of financial institutions was so good that there weren't any financial crises until these began to be dismantled in the 70s and 80s. And you take a look at the 1960s, the popular movements that then also led to a significant democratization of the country. The protection of freedom of speech, which I mentioned, was essentially on the wave of the civil rights and other popular movements. Women's rights, a very significant fact, the rights of ethnic minorities, these created a more free and just society. And it can happen again. It's not going to happen by itself. It takes work, dedication, effort, but it can happen.
So how did they do it then, and what can we learn from that so we can do it now?
Well, it's not a big secret. I don't know how old you are, but I lived through it, actually both of them. I was a child in the 30s. I was very active in the 60s. There's no big secrets. Education, organization, dedication, commitment, picking actions appropriate to situations, all of that works. You can look through the details, but we can, so sit-down strikes in the 1930s, organization of women's consciousness-raising groups in the 60s and the 70s, anti-war activism. I mean, all of these things work. They have to be done, of course. They don't happen by themselves.